The obstacle is the way. Part 2 Action. Practice persistence. He says the best way out is always through. And I agree to that, or in so far as I can see no way out but through. Robert Frost. For nearly a year, General Ulysses S. Grant tried to crack the defenses of Vicksburg, a city perched high on the cliffs of the Mississippi. Critical to the Confederacy's stranglehold on the most important river in the country. He tried attacking head-on. He tried to go around. He spent months digging a new canal that would change the course of the river. He blew the levees upstream and literally tried to float boats down into the city over flooded land. None of it worked. All the while, the newspapers chattered. It had been months without progress. Lincoln had sent a replacement, and the man was waiting in the wings. But Grant refused to be rattled, refused to rush or cease. He knew there was a weak spot somewhere. He'd find it or he'd make one. His next move ran contrary to nearly all conventional military theory. He decided to run his boats past the gun batteries guarding the river, a considerable risk, because once down, they could not come back up. Despite an unprecedented nighttime firefight, nearly all the boats made the run unharmed. A few days later, Grant crossed the river about 30 miles downstream at the appropriately named Hard Times, Louisiana. Grant's plan was bold, leaving most of their supplies behind. His troops had to live off the land and make their way up the river, taking town after town along the way. By the time Grant laid siege to Vicksburg itself, the message to his men and his enemies was clear: he would never give up. The defenses would eventually crack. Grant was unstoppable. His victory wouldn't be pretty, but it was inexorable. If we're to overcome our obstacles, this is the message to broadcast, internally and externally. We will not be stopped by failure, we will not be rushed or distracted by external noise. We will chisel and peg away at the obstacle until it is gone. Resistance is futile. At Vicksburg, Grant learned two things. First, persistence and pertinacity were incredible assets and probably his main assets as a leader. Second, as often as the result from such dedication, in exhausting all the other traditional options, he'd been forced to try something new. That option, cutting loose from his supply trains and living off the spoils of hostile territory, was a previously untested strategy that the North could now use to slowly deplete the South of its resources and will to fight. In persistence, he'd not only broken through, in trying it all the wrong ways, Grant discovered a totally new way, the way that would eventually win the war. Grant's story is not the exception to the rule. It is the rule. This is how innovation works. In 1878, Thomas Edison wasn't the only person experimenting with incandescent lights. But he was the only man willing to test 6,000 different filaments, including one made from the beard hair of one of his men, inching closer each time to the one that would finally work. And, of course, he eventually found it, proving that genius often really is just persistence in disguise. In applying the entirety of his physical and mental energy, in never growing weary or giving up. Edison had outlasted impatient competitors, investors, and the press to discover, in a piece of bamboo, of all things, the power to illuminate the world. Nikola Tesla, who spent a frustrated year in Edison's lab during the invention of the light bulb, once sneered that if Edison needed to find a needle in a haystack, he would proceed at once to simply examine straw after straw until he found the object of his search. Well, sometimes that's exactly the right method. As we butt up against obstacles, it is helpful to picture Grant and Edison. Grant with a cigar clenched in his mouth. Edison on his hands and knees in the laboratory for days straight. Both unceasing, embodying cool persistence and the spirit of the line from the Alfred Lord Tennyson poem about that other Ulysses, to strive, to seek, to find. Both, refusing to give up. Turning over in their minds option after option, and trying each one with equal enthusiasm. Knowing that eventually, inevitably, one will work. Welcoming the opportunity to test and test and test, grateful for the priceless knowledge this reveals. The thing standing in your way isn't going anywhere. You're not going to outthink it or outcreate it with some world-changing epiphany. You've got to look at it and the people around you, who have begun their inevitable chorus of doubts and excuses, and say, as Margaret Thatcher famously did, you turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. Too many people think that great victories like Grant's and Edison's came from a flash of insight. That they cracked the problem with pure genius. In fact, it was the slow pressure, repeated from many different angles, the elimination of so many other more promising options, that slowly and surely churned the solution to the top of the pile. Their genius was unity of purpose, deafness to doubt, and the desire to stay at it. So what if this method isn't as scientific or proper as others? The important part is that it works. So what if this method isn't as scientific or proper as others? The important part is that it works. Working it works. It's that simple. But again, not easy. For most of what we attempt in life, chops are not the issue. We're usually skilled and knowledgeable and capable enough. But do we have the patience to refine our idea? The energy to beat on enough doors until we find investors or supporters? The persistence to slog through the politics and drama of working with a group? Once you start attacking an obstacle, quitting is not an option. It cannot enter your head. Abandoning one path for another that might be more promising? Sure, but that's a far cry from giving up. Once you can envision yourself quitting altogether, you might as well ring the bell. It's done. Consider this mindset. Never in a hurry. Never worried. Never desperate. Never stopping short. Remember and remind yourself of a phrase favored by Epictetus: persist and resist. Persist in your efforts. Resist giving in to distraction, discouragement, or disorder. There's no need to sweat this or feel rushed. No need to get upset or despair. You're not going anywhere, you're not going to be counted out. You're in this for the long haul. Because when you play all the way to the whistle, there's no reason to worry about the clock. You know you won't stop until it's over, that every second available is yours to use. So temporary setbacks aren't discouraging. They are just bumps along a long road that you intend to travel all the way down. Doing new things invariably means obstacles. A new path is, by definition, uncleared. Only with persistence and time can we cut away debris and remove impediments. Only in struggling with the impediments that made others quit can we find ourselves on untrodden territory, Only by persisting and resisting can we learn what others were too impatient to be taught. It's okay to be discouraged. It's not okay to quit. To know you want to quit, but to plant your feet and keep inching closer until you take the impenetrable fortress you've decided to lay siege to in your own life. That's persistence. Edison once explained that in inventing, the first step is an intuition, and comes with a burst, then difficulties arise. What set Edison apart from other inventors is tolerance for these difficulties, and the steady dedication with which he applied himself toward solving them. In other words, it's supposed to be hard. Your first attempts aren't going to work. It's going to take a lot out of you, but energy is an asset we can always find more of. It's a renewable resource. Stop looking for an epiphany, and start looking for weak points. Stop looking for angels, and start looking for angles. There are options. Settle in for the long haul and then try each and every possibility, and you'll get there. When people ask where we are, what we're doing, how that situation is coming along, the answer should be clear: we're working on it. We're getting closer. When setbacks come, we respond by working twice as hard.